Good afternoon and welcome to METALCON Live. I'm Judy Geller, Director of METALCON, here with Kaylin Burke, and we're very glad you could join us today for Civitas, the role of metal in meeting a zero carbon world. The first session in a series of webinars exploring the use of metal in design, presented in partnership with our friends at Metal Architecture magazine. Today's session is moderated by Paul Deffenbaugh, Editorial Director for Modern Trade Communications, publishers of Modern Architecture and Metal Construction News. Mark your calendar for the next Metal Architecture at METALCON Live, which is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, April 7th. Now, before I hand the mic off to Paul, I have an exciting announcement I'd like to share with you. Because metal offers a combination of flexibility, sustainability, versatility, durability, and energy efficiency, eco-friendliness, and cost-effectiveness to projects, we want to make it easy for you to make sure that metal is on your design palette. That's why we are launching an exclusive experience for architects and designers at our METALCON 2020 event that will take place next October 6th through 8th in sunny Tampa, Florida. The Architect's Experience is a unique show within a show. It will combine AIA-approved education from PSMJ Resources, Ron Blank and Associates, and others, plus inspiring exhibits, lots of networking, and a gleaming off-site tour. So stay tuned for more details to come. Do you have a project you'd like to share with your fellow architects? Look for our call for presentation form in the post-session survey that you will receive. And by the way, you will receive the form to collect your AIA credits at the end of the survey as well. One final thing, if you have any technical issues during the program, please contact us through the METALCON support chat, and we're here to help you out. And now let's get going with today's program. Take it away, Paul.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Judy, so much. We're thrilled at Metal Architecture to be partnering with METALCON on this series, and I'm also looking forward to everyone gathering in Tampa in October. I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand to get together, and it should be an exciting show. Back in the early days of the energy efficiency, green, and sustainability movements, there was a sense that high-performing structures didn't allow for good architectural design. What was energy efficient was, in fact, often thought to be kind of ugly. There's always been this kind of tension between high performance and high concept architecture. In the project we're talking about today, Civitas, we've got a high performance house that is also a high concept. In fact, if you weren't told that this structure was zero energy, zero carbon, you probably wouldn't have known it. That's why Metal Architecture is excited to partner with METALCON on this presentation by Barry Yoakum of Archimania. I'm going to turn things over to Barry in just a moment. Here's how things are going to work. Barry's got about a 20-minute presentation that's a case study of the project. We really want to make this an interactive seminar, so please ask lots of questions. I'm going to monitor them and then raise them with Barry at the end of the presentation. You can submit your questions using the Q&A at the bottom of the screen or the chat function. I'll watch both of them. But here, let me now turn things over to Barry. You can read his bio in the marketing materials, and he's going to tell you a bit about Archimania, but I wanted to jump in on a couple of things. The basics. Barry's principal of Archimania, based in Memphis, Tennessee. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and a graduate of the University of Tennessee School of Architecture. His work's been recognized nationally and internationally, and it's been featured in just about any architectural media platform you could name, as well as showing up and being featured in mainstream coverage in CNN, PBS, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Barry's lectured and taught in hundreds of forums and juried numerous design awards. He's made significant contributions to the profession as an architect, a collaborator, a speaker, a writer, an educator. Throughout all of that, he's been a vociferous and consistent advocate for issues of sustainability and is a champion of progressive, modern architecture. I'm really excited about listening to Barry talk about this project. Barry, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. We're very excited, very honored to be a part of this today. It's an exciting time to be involved in the world with 4 letters, zero. this house began almost 4 years ago, 2016, from concept. And it has evolved, and we're going to focus on the metal aspects of that today because of METALCON. And I would like to walk through a few items about who we are, about how we got to where we got, and hopefully the questions that you as the panelist, moderator, and some other questions will be helpful in learning the lessons to the greater profession. That's the goal of doing this. As Archimania, this is how we see the world. We're trying to do authentic work in what we call outside the centers of fashion. We're in the middle of the U.S. pretty much. We're definitely in the South. We're on the Mississippi River, and I think it's actually an enjoyable, great place to practice because there are a lot of challenges. Most of it has to do with dollars and the ideologies of people outside of our client base, and then those that we bring in, which have to do with the fact that we see the world much broader. We think we see the world as a whole, and we like to take international aspects mixed with regionalism and seeing how those evolve into a single project. We are a collective. I might be one person working on this, but as all of you know, there's no way to bring a project to fruition without quite a number of this staff. And we had pretty much about 5 people, including myself, work on it off and on through these years. And my business partner, Todd Walker, he's a Mississippi State grad. As Paul said, I'm University of Tennessee. But this map represents the fact that we have people across the country. We love attracting talent from other parts of the country that want to live here. And it's an exciting time. The most satisfaction we get is our clients first and how they recognize our work, and they keep coming back. We like that. And they also attract other work for us. But also, many of you are our peers, and we appreciate the fact that you recognize our work when we enter competition and so forth. What I'd like to do is start talking about Civitas in its context. So the context is Mississippi River. It's a very difficult site. It looks quite beautiful where we are. This site primarily looks to the west. So that's one of the first things that people are surprised at, that it's zero. It is in context with a new urbanism neighborhood, which is another thing that usually is quite interesting to people when they start realizing where this very progressive home is. Paul mentioned that if you didn't know it was sustainable, you probably wouldn't, and that was one of the goals of the project. We wanted it to fit in scale, massing. It's a 4-bedroom home, and yet it's very compact. It's 2,800 square feet. And it's called Civitas, and Civitas has to do with a sense of community. That was the goal from day one with my wife and I. We took the goal of, okay, we're not only going to do a home for us, we want to do it for our neighborhood, and we want to do it for our community. And usually people chuckle about them when it talks about neighborhood because it actually fits. And now that we've been in a year, it's amazing what the neighbors really say or do about it. And it's definitely interesting. It creates dialogue. People from all over the place come and have looked at it, photographed it, and it seems to be a popular spot for photo bombs for taking pictures of people. It's the strangest thing. But I think that interest that's what we've got to do to change the world on the world of climate. It's not going to get there by just signing a AIA 2030 form, which we were one of the earlier adopters of that signature. It's definitely the beginning. There's a lot of different driving forces that got us to where we are. But to do it as one, for the betterment of the world, we've got to leapfrog, and we want to share lessons of all the good, the bad, and the ugly of getting there. So the mission was to create this actionable change, not talk about it. We put our money where our mouth is. You're going to find out. My business partner and I also did that on our offices, and we're about to submit that as we are for certification for ILFI actually. But it's a progressive home. We saw it early on that it would be a laboratory experiment. We were sitting in the audience listening to Julie Snow and Angie Brooks talk about the Coates Awards in New York. And we looked at each other and said, you know what? It's time to be an example and live it and breathe it, test it, and be a living laboratory. So it's a demonstration. At that time, in 2016, we were looking at accomplishing AIA 2030 commitment. That's going on to be carbon neutral. As it stands, we've submitted for carbon positive and energy positive through ILFI. And we've got the numbers that we've submitted on that, and we're waiting certification. A little bit about my past that goes into this. I was born in Knoxville, raised in Memphis, Tennessee since 1957. Love this area. The greatness about working in an area that is attached many times to history is it gives you a chance to elevate and have a major effect on a community. And we believe we've done that. And we hope we continue to do that. The Southern Dog Trot informed this house. And the two diagrams really explain that, and the fact that when we looked at doing this project as part of this challenge, we realized we really wanted to do a 200-year building. And one of the best ones that I go back to is this cabin in the Appalachians that I've seen many, many times. The whole idea is how something is the past is really zero carbon, zero energy of the past. How do you take that? We've gotten so dependent on mechanical and technology, and yet this house on the right, Civitas, is filled with technology, but it's got to come to the basis. How do you use all the benefits? And it took a lot of research. We started researching and working our ways backwards. One of our former Archimaniacs gave me this book, and that was Spacesuit Fashioning Apollo. I love seeing history and research that's been done before and how you apply it today. So it got me interested in how to protect the astronauts. There's 21 layers to an Apollo spacesuit in the 1960s. And how could that be applied to a home in the 21st century, besides normal passive conditions? So we started talking about layers. So Civitas started becoming about layers. How do you move through 200 years of life? And if you start at the basis, how can you offset wasted energy and make it more comfortable, which will start to be a thing? And where layers came to was, how do you start creating these different layers, which also created ideology around the word facade. And the details of creating a number of layers we'll see later on in this presentation started becoming a really major driver of how we layered not just details and elements and materiality, but how we layered spaces and how we shifted spaces and forms to create more space. So what you see here is really the beginning of the layering and components overall of the project, and how we shifted glass around by doing studies, and how we have 16% of our skin envelope is actually dedicated to glass, which typically in most homes is probably in the higher 20 percentile to 30 in many cases. So we had to start allocating and come up with concepts. And part of that concept was the lower pavilion. There's really three forms. There's a lower pavilion, which is public living. And those are very accessible to the public and our friends and guests, and even bringing people in. And then there's a very private space you're going to see that we call the sanctuary. And then there's a super private space on the very top, which is the nest. You have to really be invited to get there. And then how these different components come together. They started making us look at facades at first, when we started looking at solar panels and how we related to the sky, and how how the solar panels themselves started becoming a rain screen. You're going to see that, or a solar screen and rain screen. And then the sixth facade is how you start dealing with the earth. In our case, we have one of the highest seismic conditions in the country, the most major east of the Rockies, and soil that is 12 feet of soil that was dredged from the Mississippi River a couple of decades ago, and how that impacts a zero carbon home. The house has 60-something panels. It's on-grid, off-grid, and a battery backup. It can survive per AIA 2030 challenge. It had to at least survive, I think it was a little over a week. And this can actually survive longer than that. And half of those, basically half the panels go to the grid, half the panels go to the battery. And we do sell all the power from the on-grid goes directly to the grid, and we have to buy it back, which is beneficial to us slightly, but it's beneficial to our neighbors in the world because we're lowering the utility demands of the area. Paul wrote a story when we were honored with the Metal Architecture Awards this past year. And the story really dealt with light and shadow. And that's what the house became a lot about. How does one express what a sustainable home is? Well, it really starts becoming about, if you do it in layers, then you start being able to express it much like an Ansel Adams photograph is how I look at it. And that is all these different layers of how the house changes. One of my neighbors came out 6 months after we'd been in, and he was totally amazed now that all the construction's gone. The house really becomes a large art installation because it's constantly changing. It goes from sometimes where it looks like a totally smooth surface with the metal, and yet it has different elements. You can see the shadow line on this. This is pleated metal panels that were maximized, no waste on the panels. They were designed with the installer, and then aluminum scrims and long-lasting, durable coatings that actually, I believe, will, over the life, by the time I get through with it and other people are dealing with it, it'll really have a patina on the white, which we're very excited about. I think as it ages, it'll age gracefully. And that was part of the goal. Arrival and how one enters his home is a little different than a lot of other homes. It's elevated. It actually becomes a stopping place for many, many people that we do know and many, many people we don't know. And they are always asking questions. And that is good for the world we're in. So people see that period style is not the solution long-term. Traditional means will not save this issue that's before us of how we've affected the earth, and we need to turn the clock back on how much energy we're using and how much carbon we're sequestering or not even installing. Spatially, the scrims that you'll start to see, we're going to show that they actually move. The occupants control this as many app-driven systems to really understand the wellness that is located inside. Enclosure changes. We know studies through major universities and think tanks that when somebody controls their environment, they have a better attitude. They have a better healthy well-being. In this case, the water, the pool, the deck area, it comes and goes and can be controlled. The sun is controlled. The amount of privacy into the later glass is controlled by these natural use of the scrims, and the intervention that comes out of that is constantly changing. And that makes it a quite enjoyable experience. We actually use windows in this house. I had a house that was one of the first lead homes in Tennessee years ago that we sold to get into this one. And we never used the windows hardly. It wasn't that sensitive a design almost a dozen years ago. This one's very sensitive. Uses a lot of principles of the South of how to move air through chimney effect and cross ventilation much better than we would do in the past. So you can see someone moving these scrims. They're lightweight. They're about 40 pounds a piece. Anybody can move it. Our son can move it. Gas can move it. And it's ever changing. It changes with the seasons. We're going to move at this point into kind of some of the constructability and how we got to be able to get to an envelope. We did a single pour concrete. We used a lot of prefabrication. We had a lot of complexity underneath the slab. The entire slab is radiant heated, including the garage area. It has a separate zone. We haven't used it at this point. We don't need it. The house is so well insulated. We have geothermal involved. It only runs at about a 5 to 7% capacity. So that helps reduce load tremendously. The prefabrication of the steel, the cross-laminated timber, which is heavy timber elements, and how we put those together, and then the infill is our SIPs. Everything came packaged. And yes, we had a crane there for more days than we wanted, but it went together pretty effortlessly once it started moving. We use SIPs a different way. Is the backup for the metal, and that is we used them in every condition we could do. We never quite created a attic type space this scale to support the solar panels. And we also did something that's been written pretty good about, a double skin in this condition, all metal. One subcontractor on this did everything that touched metal, which we thought was smart. It also begins with the layering system and the type of vapor barrier. And that's one thing we found out very quickly, how that those two systems work hand in hand, and they're not separate devices. They're very one together. And the metal installer definitely has to approve that, because they were really warranting and wanting to put something together correctly. But this 60-something foot long metal double skin also serves as a solar shade on the south facade. And it also serves as a gutter. It runs down to a 80-foot long, or a downspout technically, into a 80-foot long gutter that we catch into two cisterns that are located underneath the parking in the back. The canvas is ever changing. As I mentioned earlier, it has started to become a piece of art in itself. The way that nature actually engages with the house, which we think is a very big aspect of one reason that we chose a white coated panel, was to become a canvas. That came out of many design studies. One thing I wanted to move to, as we're winding down, is the interior. We use metal on the interior. You can see the vertical fluted. We have 4 different panel systems on this house, all broken, all pretty cost effective. And we actually run this metal from right to left. You can actually see it move into what we call the gathering space, which is basically the entry, the kitchen, the dining, and also my wife's office. And that metal, one thing that always fascinates me in the world of design is trying to bring exterior materials to the inside, which we all know is very difficult at times, but sometimes you just have to stretch those limits and implement them in how a form moves through a house. Many of these forms are shifting and sliding inside the footprint, and it would be a shame to have broken that and changed materiality. Even if you changed it to the same color, it would not be the same. We also did other things with metal. This is a custom fireplace that we designed, and it is an eco-friendly. It's actually a water vapor fireplace, and it's pretty amazing. And it's it's really created ambiance year round. It's not something, if you have a house and you have a fireplace and it's a very tight house, energy efficient as this is, you could run a regular fire for about 5 minutes and you'd have to turn it off. This stays on constantly when we want it to. We worked with nature very early on. The house is actually a chimney in itself. The nest, the third story, you can't see it here, but you saw it in some earlier pictures. It actually has a app operated skylight that we can actually open and create a draft, much like in an attic draft fan that you would do prior to electrical mechanical ventilation. This is a slide we created for this discussion, and we've shown it a couple of times. For the most part, the darker colors represent a better solution to an R value or sun shading. But basically, we had 10 layers, much like trying to represent how the Apollo spacesuit was put together. We put together 10 layers on the bottom, on the first level of the facade, that is movable and changeable and tunable. And that begins with the solar scrims, and work your way all the way across to the inside air of that very light green on the left. But up top, when I talked about the double skin, we added 2 more layers to this, except for the solar scrim. So on the 2 layers above, you've got about a 3-inch airspace between metal conditions. So it really acts as a vent and it acts as the gutter. We used Tally and Safara in modeling. We had never done that before. We invested in that for this project. And one of the big goals, the reason I'm ending closer on these 2 slides, this really started changing our practice. We have worked on all types of sustainable projects, but when you do start to marry performance with high design, high performance, high design, it takes on a whole different attitude within the office. People start getting attracted to it. People have asked me how people got on the project. Pretty much people kind of volunteered and said, hey, I'd like to work on that. And they would do different things that their skill sets would allow them to. I thought that was pretty exciting on how to try to not disrupt a practice any more than you have to when you start doing research projects. And we do a lot. We do a lot of exploration early on a lot of projects that either do come to fruition or don't, but we learn from them. One of those learning parts is what we call the small, medium, large, and extra large. From this one project, Civitas at the top, and it's black and white, very background oriented, just light and shadow, has brought light to our offices of the medium scale that is also in certification right now with ILFI for zero carbon, zero energy. It's a 1957 restoration, so it's got a lot of exciting elements to it, bringing it back to life in a very vibrant part of Memphis that has continued growing. We moved it into a larger project for the city of Memphis. We're actually working with them and trying to help them with their very first guidelines of how to bring AA framework into the city of Memphis and start formatting and letting Memphis be a leader in that. And then this is one of our large international clients where we're trying to actually help change typologies of spaces that have lots of air that may not be heated or cooled, but they have spaces that need extra cooling and heating in different times of the year. So we're looking at changing typologies. What we're excited about is this one project not being intended to change everything, but we feel like now that we are complete and we've been in it a little over a year, it's changed a large scale variety of projects and typologies, and we think it's helping the world, and we hope you see that too. We end on this slide. It's one view, this one framed window. The upper level of this house is all about very specialized framing of views. because we had to limit the amount of glass to help not only the privacy, but the energy load, so we can move more glass downstairs in the public space. But what is better than nature? What is better than seeing what changes every day? It's not about the house, it's about the nature, it's about our environment and what we're doing and how metal helped us achieve that.
So thanks very much for that. That was great. I want to encourage everybody to submit their questions here. I know you all have a lot of questions about maybe some of the details on some of the material selection and how some of these elements were put together. And there's a lot going on here. I've got a couple of questions, so I'll kick things off if you don't mind. You were talking, Barry, you said there are about 5 people at Archimania who were involved in putting this project together, and it was a lot of experimentation. And a lot of research involved in it. Can you talk a little bit about how that process worked within Archimania and how you kept it from being kind of disruptive to a firm? Sometimes projects like this can kind of sidetrack.
I think any kind of project like this, bringing it into a firm, at that time we were probably about 26, 28 people. We're a few less now, but for the most part, we like staying in that range, because it leaves us pretty nimble. One of the things is attitude. Is just anytime you're involved in projects that you haven't been there before, it's disruptive. It's a mental condition, if nothing else. It doesn't mean it has to disrupt other projects, but you're used to doing things a certain way. You introduce softwares and techniques and guidelines, and having to read and understand and explore new details. The details we learned, Will Randolph in our office worked with me very extensively on the design and detailing, and many of the details, he would say it too, were my details sketched out on the site or the night before we had a construction meeting. And I was also the builder. And we had several dozen of subcontractors. Being involved that intimately, that affects the practice too when you got one of your principal partners tied up in something like that. And to keep day to day everything else going, it's mind-boggling. But the excitement of that is when you come out the other side, I tell everybody now, it's kind of like having a major master's in sustainability. This is not talking it, this is walking it. And I think seeing 4 or 5 other people want to be part of that walk, and then 6 or 7 more here or there, and everybody's still learning. We are still getting data back on this, and just now getting the kind of information we can share with people. But the way to do it is in our office, and Todd implemented this years ago, and we're 25 years old this year. We ask people what they want to work on. It's a different kind of office environment. It's definitely studio. We try to do that when we see their talents where they can actually benefit, and the client can benefit, and the project can benefit. In this case, different people had different abilities, and they brought it to the table. It wasn't, oh, you're assigned this. So part of that non-disruption is you've got to have people that want to work different times and efforts, and they'll put their own energy in it, not because it's demanded, because they see there's a goal at the end of the tunnel for something.
Thanks, Barry. Questions are starting to come in. I'm going to ask one for myself first before I jump over to those. And one of the things, this was built in a TMD neighborhood, and it doesn't fit that. And you talked a little bit about how the neighbors had come to appreciate it and enjoy it, but we often see this with metal skin buildings or something like that, that they don't fit or are not easily accepted into more traditional neighborhoods. Can you expand on that a little bit, how the neighbors reacted to the project, and what the feeling was in the neighborhood? I mean, obviously that was kind of, I'm sure they were a little frightened at first, but what?
Well, I can't speak for them, I wouldn't, but I know the reactions now that we get, and it's people, we have 5 or 6 homes in this new urbanism environment. It's a quarter of a century old itself. You work within the guidelines and you don't fight the guidelines. And actually this house fits the guidelines. For instance, it has an elevated porch and it has to be a minimum of 30 inches off the ground. It does that. It just happens to be a very different kind of porch. The scrim move around the porch. They're not a wall. They're a moving device. Those are metal for ease of use and maintenance and 200-year life. The skin itself has 4 different profiles. We think that's important. It creates this whole idea of light and shadow. I would prefer maybe even a different metal 2 years ago, but as we moved through it, it seemed like it felt more of the neighborhood because it was tiled, you know, it was shingled effect. We played with about a dozen different skin patterns and solutions and seaming. It's handcrafted material. It's not just stuck up like I think most. We go into a lot of neighborhoods, especially in our kind of environment, even in commercial, where people will try to keep metal out because they're used to metal buildings that are not designed. And I think that's what's missing. And the profession itself has hurt itself because it's the design sensitivity it takes is how do you take something and what does it want to become? People talk about what a brick wants to become. So what's a metal panel want to become? Well, first you got to start with scale and the metal itself, and the whites seem to fit. It's ever changing. And when you start to see that and you have a neighbor come out that probably wasn't wild about it 24 months ago, and they go, wow, this thing's ever changes. It creates, I like saying, we like doing architecture that creates dialogue. If it gets you started a discussion, what's a better icebreaker than them asking, why'd you do this? What'd you do on that? What's it mean? Now you get to tell your story. If you just sit back, and it's definitely a foreground building where the rest of the neighborhood becomes background. So it really has to do with line. How's the scale? You know, how's it relate to other porch height, you know, how's it, we opened up and created a view shed for the neighboring properties that are not developed. It actually helped with the design because then we could go really more of a east-west direction for the upper form. So how do you work all that together and it's not just putting a piece of metal up?
Thanks. I want to turn it over to some of the folks who are asking questions here, and you related to it a little bit when you talked about working with you were the builder, and so you had to work with subcontractors and somebody's asking here, how much experience in high performance construction did your subs have? And particularly in this region where projects like this are kind of rare. And if they didn't have much experience, how did you help educate them? And I'm going to add on to that because you told me an interesting story about the folks who did the scrims as well, but answer that and then lead into the who handled the scrims and that process.
So to start with, as the builder, we had almost 30 subs, some kind of vendor, whatever. And basically very few of them, like a couple, may have had some sustainability experience. So we had to help educate them. Every one of their contracts had a paragraph and a little bit of training involved to where we would go over these issues. And that's the only way you in any kind of building project. This is the 4th house I've done, but this is definitely the most complex. And I had a constructability consultant who helped a lot in helping figure out who I could go to and get people that would work on it. And they wanted to work on it, wasn't just a project. And we did pretty good. We only had a couple of bad subs for the most part. But the training process, even talking, you really have to get things simplified, like when you talk the big impact things like sealants, to make sure they're VOC, paints, VOC, CLT. No one had ever done CLT in this area of the country. Okay. Not within 200 miles that we're aware of on a scale like this. Since then, we've installed it into a music performance venue for a city. It allowed us to work in a venue we wanted to learn, so we could become the specialists in it. We had somebody come to us from an educational standpoint nationwide, and they were doing a little seminar, and they said, basically, you know probably more about it than that person knew, because we're actually doing it. We were allowed to do it. We had a good code specialist to help us go ahead and provide it. The house is sprinklered. How you use timber in a hybrid condition. It's a lot of learning process. It's a master's degree. We now have some people we can go to in the same sub that actually helped do the framing and CLT, also wound up doing the SIPs, because the closest person we could find that had any experience was St. Louis, and that was cost an arm and a leg. And this thing was done on a budget. This is a budget home. It's higher in budget, but it's still on a budget.
The follow-up question from somebody about the contractor training, and did you find it repeatable by putting contractor specific qualifications in the specifications?
This is not your normal process. This is where you're hiring subs and you're doing details together as you figure them out. I mean, just to figure out how to pour about 2,500 square feet of concrete in one single pour, we wound up pumping it. I was in New York City when they pumped it. That was very nerve-wracking. But it's polished concrete. The entire slab is polished concrete. Exterior, inside, garage, it's all one single level, which is looking toward the world of aged as we continue to age. It's taking those specs don't mean a lot, believe it or not, beyond the fact that you got to find the right people that want to work with you on it. It's not a commercial project, although the majority of these subs wound up being commercial grade people. No one had ever done SIPs that we're aware of at this scale in this locale. So now we have somebody that knows how to put SIPs up and CLT. We have one sub in the area that we know of, and they're good.
Great. I've got a couple of questions about mechanical systems. You mentioned it's a geothermal and that you had floor heating. Talk about the cooling systems, and is it passive? You also mentioned about the chimney effect for this air circulation, but did you have a forced air or anything?
Oh yeah. So it's a dual system. The radiant was not the expensive part. The geothermal really wasn't the expensive part, because it is, the heating and cooling is both geothermal. So basically the earth is the heat pump, and the lines go into the pool, which is a lap pool. The lines go into the 3,400 gallons of cistern, and there's 20 something what we call horizontal loops that go down 29 feet. They go down vertical, but they don't go further than 29 feet because we're on top of a major aquifer, and anything past 30 feet would be considered a well. So we're very sensitive about our environment, but we were the first ones to get that approved in this county for that technique, because it's typically not looked at. Nobody had tried that here. But it's a very efficient cooling system. I mentioned heating or cooling. It doesn't matter. The fan doesn't run more than about 7% of capacity. So instead of let's say we should have had a 4-ton unit, we have basically equivalent of about a 1.5 ton. So you cut down on all those loads. If it wasn't for geothermal, this would have been probably very difficult to realize. That was the kicking point. That's when we hit in high gear and we knew we could get there with the solar. It's also LG solar and battery, and they've been great working with us, and they're the best panels. I mean, we invested in the highest performing panels we could get at the time of purchase.
You talked about the metal panels, a little bit about going through the process of deciding how to lay out the pattern, but somebody wants to know about what kind of metal panels you chose, aluminum panels, I believe, and how did you come to that decision? Why did you end up there?
Okay, I'm not going to be able to get all the technical terms down because this thing has, the metrics are mind-boggling. When somebody asks a detailed final question, the process, I'm talking about it and talk about the panels. We've got a corrugated panel on the garage. We looked at going through tally, going through as far as we started analyzing. We knew we wanted a very dark material on the garage form. We wound up with a corrugated vertical thin panel because it'll be, basically it's maintenance free. I mean, it helps. When we looked at a wood product on this particular issue, we just couldn't make it run the numbers for 200 years. It got to be a problem. The 200-year kicker really started favoring metal when we got down to it. We looked at this, the structure is partially salvaged steel. It's hybrid. It also CLT ceiling that runs the entire length. It's a pavilion, basically. Every wall and component except 1%, which is one steel shear wall, which is the entry, is removable. This entire down floor area could be reinvented without touching the structure. The upstairs, except for the exterior part of the envelope SIPs, everything on the inside can be blown out. And there's a sub-attic between the second floor and the third floor. The flooring is also CLT. So it's a sandwich in many ways, the CLT itself. But the panels, there's 4 different kinds. The reason we wound up doing brake metal on, or a pleated variegated skin on the upper skin, is we wanted a craft look. We do not like certain profiles that look so slick they look like they're stucco. We wanted to express the craftsmanship that is available in this area, which we've got great metal craftsmen and great masonry craftsmen. And we've got the masonry wall on the outside, which was well done. But from the metal standpoint, it really got down to craft. What would give us a sense of shadow? And there's a lot of profiles you can't get that in, at least in a reasonable, cost-effective way.
Craftsmanship keeps coming back on this house. It was a major part of it, and one of the parts of the house that intrigues me the most, and I find the most, reason I kind of stress the light and shadow were the scrims, moving the scrims around and the shadows they threw and the light and all of that. You chose not to use automated scrims. You have to move them by hand. And why would, there was, why do you want to be able to move those by hand? Is there an element of working on the house, being able to change the house? Is there something that you really enjoyed about that?
Well, I mentioned in the presentation about there's a healthiness of engaging and controlling one's environment. And some of the early research was, how much do people change their homes? Can they? And usually it gets down to furniture and paint, and we know those are the things that you can move them around. But to change your home, and there's an architect to be able to modify it, or my wife or my son to be able to go out and move 1 or 2 or 5 or 22. It's intriguing, one. The other is it creates a different level of opacity. On privacy, I think people are amazed. We don't try to hide the space at night. We live in it. We love being there. It's just we're used to it. But moving those scrims around and turning the lights on the porch at night actually create a additional square footage of about 300 square feet out on the, or almost 400 square feet, a porch area that becomes a room. It's an outdoor room that actually becomes a buffer, and it creates atmosphere. And part of wellness, when we get past all the things that drive me nuts about certain programs, they're so prescriptive, they leave out the word design. And that's why I liked your introduction a few minutes ago, Paul, when you said, hey, this was something different. Well, it wasn't about being prescriptive. It was about, yes, we wanted to look at a guideline and say, what's the goal? But at the bottom line is, this is a space that we live in. We enjoy being here. People, 9 out of 10 times we do a kind of survey and say, what do you think now that you're in here, you've been around? Whether they're very traditionalists or very modernists. And the word that keeps coming back is, this is comfortable. When's the last time you heard people in both arenas say that a space is comfortable? And I think that's been the nicest compliment of the project, is when somebody says, guys, this is really comfortable, because it's nothing. And they go, well, this is not what I would do, but maybe, why don't I, And I think it's that curiosity answers your question of why we would want to move a scrim. Is it creates curiosity, it creates control, which is fun, which I think architecture should be fun. It's an experience. It's not about a room, it's about a space. I talk about horizontal section when I talk our work, or parts of our work, which comes from a film format world of 16 by 9, how this house sectionally is very horizontal, and it's purposeful. It does a lot of things. There's a lot of reasons for it, but it also allows you to control it with those outside forces.
The first floor is a very public space. I mean, it's protected, that scrims protect its privacy, but it is also a very public space. But if I recall, there's kind of a fire pit area, or in the center, that's an outdoor fire pit area that is also very private. Is that what you're kind of going towards with the dog trot idea, or am I?
It is in many ways, it is the dog trot part, but it's a progressive, modern 21st century environment of it. The dog trot in my head, it begins on the south side and ends on the north. The north is a outdoor cooking kitchen area and a little patio on it for more summertime, which goes along with why a dog trot's built the way it is, and it's oriented north and south. And it allows air to move through it. It allows views to go through it. That's the modern piece of it. The decking material, which is black locust, which is great material for decking, for longevity, keeps you away from foreign species like epay that we've used before, that we're trying to get away from. But that decking material goes all the way through the kitchen, which is basically the office, Kathy's office, and it goes outside. And the finish changes a little bit, because now you've got an interior finish of it, but it doesn't look like, it's not off the shelf material. It is the same decking material. It's just how it's installed. But so it's this whole premise, just like the metal I mentioned in that one image. The deck goes through the southern dog trot element. The metal, the corrugated black metal goes through. So it's bringing your eye through it. It's bringing the sense of awareness that, hey, there's something going on here. And yes, there's two forms. There's a public, and then you get this very private, small, flexible meeting, office / bedroom / media room that's part of the garage element. In the dog trot days, that was the sleeping area. In this case, it's kind of a little piece of sleeping, but most sleeping's upstairs. So yes, it's metaphorical, it's real, and it's an interpretation.
Very specific technical question about what kind of programs you used for the LCA.
Tally.
And
highly recommend it. We had not used it before. Other people are trying to use things. I think it's a great program. I love the architects that created it. It's our people like it right now. We're using it, and we're using it on other work.
16% of the exterior is glass, if I recall, and you said
Yes.
typically
Oh, the facade, yes.
facade. Yeah, and typically 20% would be normal, but
20 to 30%, I think you'd see more normal.
there's not an absence of natural light in the interior. It's a bright, airy space.
This is true. I actually had to, I'm in the, I termed the sanctuary, the upper level, the second level. And it has very specific frame views. I showed that last view. That's out the master bedroom, which is basically this office space that I'm using right now. I had to dial down the natural light because it's so much of it, especially during the winter months when it's coming in great amounts, which we love. It's beautiful. You know, it's a beautiful change. But it's about placement and modeling. And I give us credit for that from using Safara and helping model a lot of that. It really, I think that's the beauty of the technology. It's no different than a pencil when many of us, I started in 1974 in the middle of the oil crisis, worked on coming out of UT, we were very much into passive design. So I've always been around it. I didn't know the word sustainable at that point, but I've learned that over the years. But sitting in lines to have to get gasoline is something that inspired this project too. It's 2 EV ready. We're waiting on our first major EV. We have 2 little minor EVs called Birds right now that we use to get around. I think it's amazing what our history as we move through different lives can do to shape our environment. I hope this is one of those.
I think we've worked our way through all the questions. Do you have any last final comments you want to occur to in the discussion?
One, I want to thank you, Paul, for asking us to do this and giving us some time to share. I hope we shared some things that will help. Some that will make people wonder and posture and have to figure out how to go do something different, and know that progressive work can be part of the solution, should be the solution. We have got to get beyond styles. I think that is my biggest message at the end. It's not about styles, it's about good architecture. Is this good architecture? Only other people know. We hope it is. But traditional style is not the answer. And we totally don't even understand that. Renovating, reinventing, honoring, we understand. We hope that is part of the message. And thanks for having us today.
Thank you very much, Barry. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I think we're signing off, Judy, or are you coming back on? Give it a moment to see. There's Judy.
If I can unmute. Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Thank you both so much. It was incredibly compelling. And I think we are signing off until next time we meet again on April 7th. But thank you, Paul. Thank you, Barry. That was fantastic. And remember, everybody, in order to get your credit, you have to fill out your survey. Thanks. See you soon.
Thank you. Thanks very,
Bye.
very much. Bye.